Hey, welcome everybody to the Maizex Agronomy Roundtable. Greg Stewart here with Maizex, and happy to have you along for our discussion today. We're going to tackle some things we think we've learned from 2021, whether we learned these things from being too cold or too dry or too hot or absolutely too wet. Joined today are my colleagues from Maizex, Adam Parker and Chuck Belanger and Henry Prinzen. So we've got a few slides that are going to lead us through some of the things that we want to talk about. Amongst the four of us, we'll probably step all over each other trying to say something, but please feel free to join us with comments on the chat, and we'll try to answer your questions as we go. So we're going to start with planting depth. Chuck, I really thought we would never have to talk about planting depth ever again after our 3-year trial and the number of times we've talked about it, but it seemed to not go away. In fact, as we moved later into May, when things got warmer or drier, we maybe even ran into more problems than usual. Give me your take on planting depth, Chuck.
So this year we've been doing a lot of trials. One trial in particular is corn stand audit, where we get into the field and we start looking at how the planter performed, and doing this with cooperators. And we were quite surprised to see that planting depth was definitely an issue this year. And it wasn't just down in this area, it was all over Ontario. Talking to our territory managers, they had incidents where they went out the fields and basically saw what you see in the left side picture there, where the seeding depth was anywhere from half an inch to an inch. And then you get to some fields where you get the picture on the right, where you got, a nice planting depth, 2¼ inches, nice root system starting, some nice long, deep roots, where when you look at the picture on the left, we had some shallow planted corn that, can end up being an issue later on in the season, or as the season goes on. We have incidences where, in the last 3 years, we've been trialing planting deeper at 3 inches. And like you said, we didn't think we'd have to talk about this again, but we seem to need to remind people that they need to get off the planter and look behind and see what's happening. Verify what is actually happening and going into the ground.
So I had fields that I don't think I had too many fields that were in this sort of super shallow. I'll give us just a close up where the seed is really literally at about a ½ inch or so deep. I had fields this year that were what you would say sort of modestly planted at 1.5 inches, maybe in 1.75 inches, but it occurred during the latter half of the planting season where things were drying out and we just weren't getting into moisture as the real challenge on some of that planting depth stuff.
Right. Yeah. And like we've had this discussion and we've discussed it amongst ourselves as territory managers, and it just seems that guys are getting really confident in what they have in their cab, right? And the display screens that they have, everything shows that it's doing well. It shows they got good down pressure, but they're not getting out and looking behind and verifying what's actually happening. And to your comment about later in the season, things being a little bit deeper, I guess, I really don't know how to answer that one there, Greg. So, why it would be different later than earlier? But
well, I just think that they were planting at 1.5 inches, which would have been fine on the 10th of May. But on the 23rd of May, when things had dried out, 1.5 inches just wasn't doing it anymore. That was the challenge. So I don't know, for the sake of posterity, we'll throw up our results from the last 3 years. And essentially, the yields were pretty close: 207 on 2-inch planting, 209 on 3-inch planting. And then populations, again, a little bit of an advantage to the 3-inch. And if you look at wins, which of the two settings won, a win being more than 3 bushels per acre, it did lean towards the 3-inch having a bit more wins. I think most of that came from later planted, warmer, drier soils where the 3-inch surged ahead. On the early side, probably the 2-inch did just fine. So it really does bring us to the questions of why, and just, you know, what continues to block our efforts to make sure that we're planted deep enough. You mentioned one of them already, where you've got a monitor, and bless our monitors, they're beautiful things in terms of what they show us. But yeah, that feeling that when you look at the monitor and you see green lights and everything's 99.9, it maybe just doesn't give you the incentive to shove in the clutch, walk around behind, and see where your planting depth is actually at, right?
Yep. I had an instance, you know, where like most of these guys, when you talk to them afterwards and you ask them, you know, you tell them what their planting depth was, and they're adamant that they were at 2 inches. So we'd get out and we'd start digging up some plants and showing them, you know, how to look at this. But the comfort level with these guys today, with all this technology, it's honestly, it's a little bit scary, to be honest with you, because technology is great. Believe me, all that stuff is excellent, but we still have to verify that the technology is correct, right?
Right. Well, I'm sure we're not very far away from a monitor that will tell you planting depth, but until we get there, you pretty much have to go out and verify. I also have some concerns that you know, when we get out to measure planting depth, you know, that sometimes we just don't do a good job. We give maybe too much credit to that little dipple or that little V that forms up over the seed. You know, maybe that adds a quarter or a half inch to what we think is our planting depth. I'd really like to see guys have a little 2x4 that they just settle that planting furrow down and then dig away to see you know, what their true planting depth is.
Right. Yep, exactly. That, or else what I've done is the little sticks that you have for plots, you just kind of slide the dirt across, make it fairly level without disturbing like the most of the soil, and then dig your trench, lay that stake down, and then put your measuring device in, and it gives you a good line.
Yeah. So I guess the other question is, how much of our sort of challenge with getting planted too deep is growers being afraid of the negative impact of maybe being on the deep side? Henry, what's your feeling there? You farm down in some tougher ground there. Do you think that we struggle with being deep enough because growers are legitimately afraid of being too deep?
Yeah, I think, Greg, I think that's bang on. I think that's always been a problem, crusting, right? But I think this year, guys definitely thought, like, even at home, we planted over a week. We started Monday and we finished Friday, and I had to drop the planter down a full inch in 4 days. I think the issue, I think Chuck is pretty much bang on. I think afraid of planting deep from crusting is one thing, but I think a lot of the time it's just not taking the time or setting it and forgetting it. So that's the biggest thing I see out there is you started May 15 and you set it once and you never set it again. That just doesn't work anymore, right?
Exactly.
Which gets to our fourth point on the slide, is that when soils did go through a fairly rapid dry down, warm up this year, when we got to that mid part of May, things did change pretty quickly in terms of where moisture was.
So Greg, the other thing I saw in my area was that guys were concerned about how dry it was early on. So they were doing more of a minimum till, or, you know, trying to conserve moisture by doing less tillage, and therefore had a poor seed bed. And normally if you catch a rain, you know, at some point in May, those things would be forgiven if you plant at 1.5. If we weren't in nice crumbled soil, or just a hair shallow and not in moisture, we didn't have those forgiving rains to get those other seeds or those odd seeds germinated. So that was my biggest issue this spring.
Yeah, fair enough. I still think we have this overriding lesson that we continue to learn, that moving a little bit on the deeper side is so much less risky than being on the shallow side. I think that still continues to be a dominant message. So good discussion. Yep. So Chuck, you wanted to say a few things about frost. I've got some pictures that you sent me here from some of your frost observations, the too cold part of our discussion this morning.
Yeah, so the one concern that I have is sometimes people jump too fast when they get a frost. You know, you know, we get a cold, a really heavy frost like we did, I think it was around May the 27th. And, you know, guys calling up right away, hey, we just got frosted, the corn's all brown, yellow, laying on the ground. I want to replant, right? And you get out there, you talk, you walk through this with the growers, and you kind of look at the plants, and you look down at the heart, and you still see some green down there. And there is that opportunity that corn is going to come back. Now, it depends on the stage of the corn as well, right? I don't know the exact cutoff point, but I always say around that 3-4 leaf stage, before that growing point gets too close to the surface, we should be fairly safe. So these pictures were taken at exact same location, just outside of Cargill, north of Walkerton, and it was pretty frosted. And so I planted a flag that day, and talking with the grower, and it's hard to see, but kind of just to the bottom left of that flag in the first picture, there's a little bit of green sitting there. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of the plants, was just that little touch of green. Convince the grower that, don't worry about it. That it's not a complete field of frost, just some areas. I went back on June the 16th, took some pictures, and did not move the flags. That's exactly where they were. And that's the growth that we saw. That was 14 days afterwards. And then I went back on July 5th, just last week, just to get an updated picture, and was quite impressed on the stand of the corn. So I really think before we jump and we decide to replant, I truly believe most farmers do not want to replant, right? And it's not hard to walk them through and talk about this. And a lot of them will listen to you, but I think the big thing is you really have to evaluate after a frost, and don't just jump, and don't just grab the seed and go and replant.
Cool. Thanks, Chuck, for the update. The patient's sermon is received. So we'll talk a little bit about early, or maybe we should call it ultra early planting of soybeans. This was a hot topic for us at our Maizex sessions this winter, and sort of a growing movement, a growing interest in putting soybeans in early. I've got some beans that we planted at the outdoor farm show. These are pictures that I took yesterday. So I started on April 14th. I went April 26th, and I've also got May 26th, June 14th. So got quite a range of planting dates. And as you see by the pictures, really, even though it snowed the day after I planted on April 14th, and we had quite a protracted cold spell, certainly none of these beans came out of the ground until well into May. Pretty hard to argue with now this is a nice piece of ground. This is not heavy clay or anything, but pretty hard to argue with the resilience of some of these ultra early planted soybeans. If we think about some of the data that Horst showed us, Horst Bonner from Omafra last year, so he's got some pretty early planting dates there as well. If you look at the yields, well, his top yield was May 22nd. So it's not like the ultra early beans out yielded the May 22nd beans, but they certainly performed pretty admirably, right? And in some of his data, that if you pushed the soybean maturity sort of into something longer, or even longer plus, that maybe there's a window there for bumping yields if you put some really long maturity soybeans into this ultra early planting window. And I guess the question we have for us and for those that are watching with us today, are beans really that much more resilient to this cold ultra early planting than corn? Well, that's Horst data, but there's my brilliant slide on conclusions from planting soys early. Guys, take it away. What are you hearing or seeing on ultra early soybeans this year?
I think a lot of it's up in Adam's area, so maybe Adam could speak to that, because down south here we don't see too much ultra early soybeans ourselves down here. Most guys are putting the corn in before, but
well, most of the time
you guys in the south are slow to catch on, I've heard, right?
Oh yeah.
I've heard you guys in the south are pretty slow to catch on. Go ahead, Adam.
When I look at it, I think it's also to do with soil type. So certainly anything to do with the clay textured soil and getting anything in April is going to be a pretty big challenge. So you're looking at more of those nicer loams, or the maybe more of a sandy loam soil that are a lot more forgiving. I think the theory is that beans are a lot more, they're able to adapt to their stand and to their planting conditions a lot easier than corn. Corn, we want a picket fence stand. We want very uniform emergence, where if we have some variability in beans or a few and at the end of the day, I think going to the one point is that if we do get that May 28th frost like we had this year, whether or not they're knuckling out of the ground as a cotyledon and they're planted on May 10th, or whether they were planted on April 20th, they're essentially going to be fried regardless. So you replant and you're no further ahead. But if you do miss those opportunities, although you do miss those frosts, you do set yourself up for maybe some higher yield potential and maybe pushing some longer maturity beans, especially when you move north.
Yeah.
So I got a question. So just to give Henry, what would ultra early be like? Like what date would be ultra early for you? The same question to you, Adam. And I can speak for myself down here. Ultra early for me down here would be like the first week of April, end of March, first week of April, because we're putting corn in, second week of April down here easily, right? In most cases, depending on the year, but.
I think it depends on what county you're in here. Like in Norfolk, sure, you could go in April, but like in Norfolk, it's also a guarantee that you'll have a frost in the beginning of May and they'll come out because it's on sand. So, I mean, I don't see most of this zone being able to go much later or much earlier than the last week of April or, first week of May. Like the clay is out. If you get them in at the first week of May, that's ultra early in Haldeman, and in Norfolk, no one's going to do it because they will get frosted there. Maybe on the loams a little to the north where it's cooler. I guess I talked to you about this, Chuck, about, the guy that planted them in March in Oxford. You actually need the soil to stay cold for a while. You don't want soil to warm up too early because you want to avoid those frosts you're bound to get in April, right?
Exactly.
So it is a balancing act of, planting too early or planting at the right time and hoping they stay in the ground for a couple weeks, right?
Right.
Yeah. Hey, Henry, are you prepared to recommend planting some soys before corn?
Always.
Always.
Always do it. Yeah. I've seen better late planted corn and better early planted beans because it comes down to stand establishment, right? Like a picket fence stand of corn planted late in full maturity areas. I'll give that the kicker here, right? Like Adam, I don't think he's going to be recommending that in 85-day corn country, but down here where I can plant 100-day corn right till the end of May, I would rather see my beans go in early in May and plant when the ground's warmer for my corn and have a perfect emerging stand. So
good point, Henry.
The other thing that comes to mind is that if say you got a frost event or you had a compromised stand, if it's beans, you just drive the no-till drill or the planter back through and you spike up the population, whatever you feel is right. But with corn, replanting sucks no matter what you do. So do you wipe it out, start over? Do you thicken up the stand? It's a lot tougher call on replanting corn, where soybeans, it's a lot more forgiving. So
yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys. We're going to talk about corn stands. That's kind of what we were kicking around there a little bit. And of course, in our yield tour, we've chatted a fair bit about this. When we go back out in August, end of August, to do yield tour, our final ear counts have always surprised us a little bit. That they're hovering in that 29,500, 35,000, 30,500, and thought, well, what could we do to improve that? So, Adam, you've sort of spearheaded a little bit of this initiative where we get out and look at fields earlier rather than later.
Yeah, so the last number of years on our yield tour, we show up to fields in August. We do a yield assessment. A lot of it comes down to how many actually harvestable ears there are per acre. And at the end of the day, I think we would often be disappointed with how many harvestable ears there would be. Often coming up with an average of around that 30,000 mark, which when you're looking at the yield building components of to make 200 or 220 bushels per acre, maybe that's what you're targeting. You struggle to do that on 30,000 ears. So we often are left wondering why are we only up with 30,000 ears when we know the growers planted 34,000. So What we've tried to do this year is to do some of these stand audits where we're coming in, we're asking the grower for a pretty definitive number on their seed drop. So, okay, this grower planted 34,500 seeds per acre. We know that. We know that when we went in June to do a stand assessment after planting, we had a final stand of maybe 32.5, maybe 33,000, depending on the field. Maybe it was only 31, so maybe we had some emergence issues. So we can start to identify where that attrition was in the stand. And then we're going to go to those same fields, those same locations that we flagged in June where we did those stand assessments. And we're going to go and count those ears now and see how many harvestable ears we got out of that, say, 32,000 final stand. So therefore, we can start to see the life of this crop and maybe pick out in the growing season where some of these issues came from, whether it was a planter issue, whether it was weed escapes in June, or whether it was a flood in July. So some of those things, it's just trying to give us some more background to where we can make improvements for next year.
Good. I like it. A fair bit of discussion these days about nitrogen, in terms of our management. What management do we have to do on this corn crop still here on July 13th? And, nitrogen and fungicide are certainly in the discussion. So Adam, this is a combined data from last year over Belmont and Dresden, 8 hybrids averaged together. And we see this pretty consistent trend across our data, but particularly last year, in terms of population, moving from 24 to 32, getting a nice bump in yield. And in this data set, given us a nice bump in yield when we move from 32 without fungicide, 32 with fungicide. If we have high pop, but we don't feed it with nitrogen or fungicide, our yields pull back. And our intensive plots, high pop with nitrogen, with fungicide, sort of get us back to where we were at least last year, which was a relatively dry July, where we were with just pop and fungicide. So I guess my question to you, Adam, is where are we at on our recommendation for fungicide in grain corn this year?
Yeah, so if you look at that graph where the 249, that dark green bar at 32,000 with fungicide, obviously that say 11 bushels was a pretty good return on investment. And over the last couple of years, I think the fungicides have probably been the best return on investment over additional population or the full intensive package combined. So you look at the last 2 weeks where I would say the majority of Ontario has been wet. We have, on average, a pretty good planting date across the board. High grain prices. In my mind, a fungicide is going to probably be even a very significant return on investment with the potential that we're set up for right now. So remembering that the fungicide is going to protect from any of that fungal disease that we're seeing with all this wet canopies out there, and just protecting some of the big yield that we're set up for.
Right on.
I don't think nitrogen's out of the conversation. I think it depends what type of manager you are on your nitrogen program. If you're fairly aggressive from the outset, I don't think we've lost a pile of nitrogen unless you're on a saturated clay soil or you got that 9 inches of rain and down near Chatham. But if you're on a good loam soil and really aggressive, you're probably okay, would be my gut feel. But if you're maybe a conservative guy and you're on a sand and you've had some leaching, or you're on a clay and you've had some denitrification in the last 2 weeks, it's not too late to consider throwing some more nitrogen at those fields. So
yeah, I've tried to assess that in terms of asking or answering the questions of whether you have enough now in the middle of July. I think there's kind of the way you alluded to, the Bill Dean work out of the University of Guelph suggested that you might just rely on how much rain you got. And if you're sort of 4 inches more than average in this window, that corresponds to maybe needing some additional N. In terms of a soil N test, I don't think they're very reliable at this time. You could go out and do a soil nitrate test today, and I just don't know whether I'd have any confidence. The plant's sucking the nitrate out of the ground so rapidly that I just don't trust a soil nitrate test in this window. but maybe you could come back at earleaf VTs or tassel, early silk, and maybe pull a tissue test from an earleaf. And that's not very convenient. But as you alluded to, Adam, it wouldn't be too late if you had a short, sort of deficient tissue test in the earleaf. It wouldn't be too late to apply a last 50 pounds. And
Or the other thing being is that if guys are
consider.
The other being if guys are still wide dropping, it's not too late to adjust your rate. So if you're normally a 50-pound guy at wide drop and you are looking like you're either short or your crop has a phenomenal amount of potential, maybe you turn that dial up a little bit and give it the gas. So
yeah, fair enough. And then a final comment from you, Adam, on we talked about grain corn and the price of grain and rainfall and how that sort of pushes us towards the advantages of fungicide. Give us your 30 seconds on fungicide use for silage.
Yeah, so I think it's in my mind a no-brainer this year. We want to protect as much biomass coming off those fields as we can, so reducing those leaves from getting consumed by fungal disease. And we can also try to improve the quality as far as both fiber digestibility and also try to reduce toxin load with the right fungicides. So there are really good options for putting fungicide on your silage crop and getting an awesome return on investment, increasing tonnage and trying to improve quality. So in my mind, it's a green light. So
yeah, thanks, Adam. So let's move on to soybean herbicide platforms. Henry, you're going to fill our minds with wonderfulness here on Enlist versus Extend Flex. What do you got for us?
Well, yeah, I think everyone's talking lately, especially with the US, all the dicamba situations in the US, we're all talking about herbicide platforms and other opportunities out there, right? So we got the Enlist platform, which is our glyphosate, our 2,4-D choline, which is only found in Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo. Enlist Duo has the Roundup in it. Enlist 1 is just Enlist. It's off-label to spray a different 2,4-D product, so that's important to note. And then our Liberty herbicide, right? Our extends are what we've been used to for the last few years. It's just dicamba and Roundup tolerance. Dicamba comes in many formulations currently. Ingenia, Extendamax. There's other ones on the market, but you do have to make sure you're using the new dicamba formulations.
So you've got this slide up here on water hemp, and you're trying to tell us which of the products is going to be best for you on water hemp.
Yeah, so on water hemp, I think dicamba and 2,4-D straight up have equal efficacy. Now, the kicker is if we go to the next slide here, Greg, our Enlist platform, we're allowed to mix Liberty with Enlist 1, where you're not allowed to mix dicamba with Liberty. And we come up to a very strong, 95 to 100% control on water hemp. And this is where I see the big fit of an Enlist system over an Extend Flex system is on water hemp. But remember, we shouldn't be counting on just Liberty and 2,4-D to do the job for us. We got to use residuals. We have to use an integrated approach at water hemp control in our soybeans.
Cool. So you've talked a little bit about Extend Flex. Clarify for us the difference between Extend and Extend Flex.
Yeah, so Extend Flex, we're just adding the glufosinate tolerance, which is the Liberty herbicide, right? It's the same bean platform. We add Liberty. That gives us maybe some extra protection to come in later in crop for those weed escapes that we weren't counting on, right?
Yeah. And where does Extend Flex? You talked about this winter. You talked with Mike Cobra from OMAFR about where the Extend Flex has its strengths.
Yeah, so Extend and Extend Flex, dicamba still are by far the best herbicide on Canada fleabane, which honestly is probably the most problemsome weed in Ontario right now across the board. Yeah, water hemp's there, but it's in pockets. It's not everywhere. Fleabane's in every field. And dicamba is our best product, by far and away the best product to control fleabane. So that's where the Extend or Extend Flex might have an edge, for sure. So
even with an Extend Flex bean, if you were targeting fleabane, what's your window that you're going to lay down that dicamba?
yeah, I think I don't want to see dicamba going on anything past V2, right? 2 trifoliates. You don't want a canopy. Late in season apps are not a great decision management wise. Best case scenario, I think dicamba pre with another, with some Sencor down to make sure we get 100% control of that fleabane is the best program. But yeah, we need to avoid those warmer temperatures later in the season in June when applying dicamba, right? We need to be careful doing that. So,
which I guess is kind of where you mentioned the advantage of the Extend Flex that gives you that liberty for your late in crop post emergent application to tidy things up a bit.
Yeah, I think that's what you have to look at. And we can't rely on Liberty fully. And you can see that on the chart, right?
Yep.
70 to 80% control of fleabane. Yeah, it's an option. It's not the perfect option, right? So make sure you get that residual down and try to control as much as you can at the beginning, right?
Cool. Hey, Chuck, any questions coming in from the crowd?
No, she's been pretty quiet, but I got a question for Henry here. So on the Liberty, so when they're showing the 70 to 80%, I know maybe you can't answer this, but what size fleabane are they talking about? Because if you're going to go in with Liberty, in most cases, it's later on in the season when you might have those escapes, right?
Yeah,
Might get
so
better control.
10 centimeter high fleabane, right? But the key with Liberty is 70 to 80% can be 90% one day and 50% another day, right?
Exactly.
The thing with Liberty again is application timing, application like water volume. It needs to be hot, sunny. Make sure you have lots of AMS in the tank, and go and get the coverage, because it's a burner, right? It's not systemic herbicide. It's not 2,4-D. It's not dicamba. It's not Roundup. It's coverage is key. So bigger fleabane's harder to kill. I have seen some decent results on the Enlist platform when you do Enlist 1 plus Liberty on big fleabane, like standing above the canopy. It does cook it pretty good, but yeah, we don't have a lot of numbers on that yet. I think,
Right.
Omafra is working on stuff.
Yeah. It was interesting that you made that point, because I was talking with a grower yesterday and he said, you talk about Liberty, they tell you to do complete opposite of what they tell you to do with every other herbicide. They want you to put it on hottest days of the year and lots of water, right? So there's going to be education out there with these guys to teach them how to use Liberty, right?
Yeah, and like Liberty is a great it kills all weeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on grass, it's weaker, especially on large grass. You have to remember that. If you're going to kill grass with Liberty, it needs to be small, it needs to be hot, it needs water volume. Like it's not Roundup, but it's another option. That the more options we have in our toolbox is better now, I think, with all these different weeds out there. So
yeah.
So amongst these platforms, Henry, just walk us real quick through what we might offer growers in terms of all three platforms within the Maizex Elite stable.
Yeah, so I mean, we really like our Cyclone R2X. That's our straight up Extend 1.5 RM. Great Phytophthora tolerance, great emergence. It's been a mainstay across the board for us. Extend Flex, we have a new 2.0 out. Again, great emerging bean, really bushy canopy, nice looking bean so far. And then I think, the fit on Enlist is in these higher heat unit areas where we have vegetable crops or grapes, and Emerge is looking really solid. We've had that bean for a couple of years, and it continues to be a high yielding performer for us at a full season length. So
super. Hey, thanks for the update. So that's our roundtable for today. Adam and Chuck and Henry, been nice to be with you virtually. And for the discussion, we've had some good things that we're learning in 2021, and some lessons that we'll put a sharper point on as the season ends up. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Greg.
thanks.